The Old Testament prophets confirm that the Great Tribulation that Jesus predicted was going to be in the immediate future of Jesus and his disciples and his listeners. That it would happen, as Jesus said, within a generation, and that it is now in our past and not in our future. In the Olivet Discourse, which is Jesus' major prophecy in Matthew chapter 24 and 25, he spends the first part of it, Matthew chapter 24, verse 1 all the way down to verse 34. In verse 34 he says, "This generation shall not pass away before all these things I've just listed, up until verse 34, until all these things are fulfilled." Then he goes on and talks about other stuff, but during those first 34 verses, he is predicting a time of great tribulation in Judea and in the city of Jerusalem, when the city will be surrounded by armies, in which the temple will be destroyed and not one stone will be left upon another. And throughout that section, verse 1 to 34, Jesus quotes the Old Testament quite a few times. He uses figures of speech that, if we don't know how the Old Testament prophets used those figures of speech, we could imagine they mean something else. For instance, this idea of coming on the clouds. We might imagine that this is speaking about Jesus' final return. But that's a figure of speech that's used by Old Testament prophets, and Jesus is engaging their prophecies as he brings the Olivet Discourse. It's a figure of speech that means God is coming in judgment over a city or over a nation. Let me give you an example. Coming on the clouds. Psalm 104 verse 3 says that the Lord makes the clouds his chariots. Or Isaiah 19 verse 1 says, "Behold, the Lord is riding on a swift cloud and comes to Egypt, and the idols of Egypt will tremble at his presence." So this was about a judgment coming to Egypt, which happened, which was fulfilled, but God wasn't literally seen riding on the clouds. It's a figure of speech. And then, of course, there is the biggest one in Daniel, which I'll come back to in a minute. But let's talk about some other signs. Jesus says in Matthew 24, verse 29, "The sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven." Anytime I've taught that the tribulation has been fulfilled within a generation, like Jesus said, there's always someone that says, "Well, have the stars fallen out of the sky? Has the sun refused to shine?" Imagining that this is a literal thing that's going to take place and not a figure of speech. People, this is prophetic speech. Listen, Isaiah 13 verses 9 and 10 says Isaiah is bringing a prophecy against Babylon and how Babylon will be judged and overthrown. And Isaiah prophesies, "The stars of heaven and their constellations will not give their light." Now, Babylon was judged. Babylon was overthrown. But literally, the stars did not stop giving their light. It's a figure of speech, meaning your power's going to go out. Even the heavens above are saying it's all over for you. Ezekiel 32, verses 7 and 8, a prophecy against Egypt. "I will cover the heavens and darken their stars. I will cover the sun with a cloud, and the moon shall not give its light." Egypt was overthrown, but these things did not literally happen in the sky. They were figures of speech that Ezekiel used, just like Isaiah used them against Babylon. And Joel uses them as well. Joel chapter 2 verse 10 and verse 30 to 31. "The sun and moon grow dark, the stars lose their brightness, the sun shall be turned to darkness." These celestial collapses are figures of speech, idioms that were used to speak of the fall or the destruction of a nation. Jesus said that the temple the house of God there, your house shall be left desolate. Matthew 23, verse 38. In Luke 21, verse 20, Jesus said, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, you'll know the time is near. This is a reference to Old Testament prophecies. Micah 3:12, Zion shall be ploughed as a field, Jerusalem shall become a heap of ruins. Jeremiah 19:10-11, I will break this people and this city like a potter breaks a vessel. Lamentations 2, verses 1-9, the Lord in his anger has set the daughter of Zion under a cloud. So many figures of speech that we could look at. One that I would just like to look at is the prophecies of Daniel, because Jesus specifically says in the Olivet Discourse, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel. So what you need to realize is after the time of Daniel, Antiochus Epiphanes had invaded Jerusalem and he had sacrificed a pig on the altar in Jerusalem, which was an abomination to the people. But Daniel had predicted a time when this abomination would happen full scale, and he even gave a time period for it. In Daniel 9, verse 26 and 27, on the wings of abominations shall come one who makes desolate. Daniel 11:31, the forces of him shall appear and profane the temple and the fortress, and shall take away the regular burnt offerings. We see this abomination of desolation is the temple in Jerusalem being desecrated, which happened in fulfillment of Jesus' prophecy in 70 AD. And Daniel 12 says, from the time that the regular burnt offering is taken away and the abomination that makes desolation is set up shall be, and he counts a number of days, which is about 3.5 years, the time of the Roman-Jewish war that caused the abomination of desolation to take place. You know, when Jesus is giving his speech, not only does he say this generation will not pass away before all these things that he had predicted would be a great tribulation, before they had all come to pass, he repeatedly uses Old Testament quotations from the prophets, from Daniel, from Isaiah, from Ezekiel, from Joel, from Jeremiah, and especially from Daniel. And when we go back and read those prophecies, and then we read what Jesus said, we can see that Jesus was speaking in the same tradition as the Old Testament prophets. When he talked about judgment coming, God coming on clouds, the Son of Man being on clouds, the stars falling from the sky, he is speaking in the same prophetic tradition as the Old Testament prophets did when they were predicting the fall of a city or a nation or an empire.